Good morning, everyone. April 7th, 2019. I'm here at Zero Hedge. It's not the economy. This comes from Jeffrey Tucker via the American Institute for Economic Research. This is a really good read. Well worth, if this would change, so would public opinion. There is no shortage of examples. People talk about health care for all, solving climate change, providing security in old age, universal educational access, boosting wages, ending discrimination, and you can add to the list without end. And that's one side. The other speaks of national identity, protecting jobs, making us more moral, forming cultural cohesion, providing security against the foreign enemy, and so on. Obfuscation. All of this, no matter how fancy the language, is obfuscation. What all of this really means is put the state in charge. What's strange is the willingness to, or unwillingness rather, to say it outright. This is for a reason. The plans the politicians have for our lives would come across as far less compelling if they admitted the following brutal truth. There really are only two ways to allocate goods and services in society. The markets, which rely on individual choice, and the state, which runs on compulsion. No one has ever found a third way. You can mix the two, some markets and some state-run operations. But there always is and always will be a toggling between the two. If you replace markets, the result will be more force via the state, which means bureaucratic administration and rule by force. If you reduce the role of the state, you rely more on markets. And this is the logic of political choice, and there's no escaping it. The above paragraph is the great truth of political economy. I've never seen any evidence to dispute it, and yet it is the great, unsayable truth. Seasons of political rhetoric fly by with no frank discussion of what precisely this or that proposal would require of the state and how it will affect our lives, much less a serious analysis of the risks of making a problem worse by replacing market forces. Diversity in markets. To be sure, when I say markets, I don't only mean the money exchange economy in which price and accounting govern choices. Markets include philanthropy, familial organization, houses of religion, volunteering to work without pay, and everything else in the social order that relies on human volition. There are infinite varieties in the way of market instantiate themselves in human lives. That one was hard to say. The variations are contingent on culture, norms, traditions, and so on. There can be more or less voluntarily ways the market expresses itself, just like there can be more or less corrosive forms of statism. But let us not deny that the choice is real. If this is correct, it is strange how people complain about markets and how little the only alternative is discussed, studied, evaluated, and finally judged. And that alternative, of course, is government. This is because the statist means will always come up short. Depending on the state to deliver some social goods depends on using the threat of violence to compel people to do what they otherwise would not choose to do. You know, like supporting people who are unwilling to do it for themselves. There is no clean path to doing so. The bureaucracy always ends up as the everyday mediator between the individual and the point of a gun. You don't like government, and nobody really does. Now, just think about your experiences when you go to the DMV or the Social Security office or any state-run institution. They treat you as if you're an inconvenience. Many times people are rude, short-tempered, and outright assholes. And your service is subpar. But if you face your first federal audit or an FBI investigation or seek benefits from an agency, or perhaps you have a relative or yourself is mixed up in the criminal justice system. Whatever it is, no experience in the private sector can compare. No, it can't. I've been involved in a couple of these, and let me tell you, it's a nightmare, and the state makes it a nightmare. The state makes living sometimes a nightmare. It means unpredictable wait times. You aren't really a customer, you're a bother at best. Objecting to any aspect of the service is mostly pointless. Step out of line and you're in trouble. You know, you get shot in the back, tasered, your head stomped on, and any number of other abuses you can think of. You are a subject, and the sullen faces and dreary postures of your fellow citizens in line underscores that point. The truth is that no one relishes dealing with the government at any level. Where would you rather be? The Driver's License Bureau or McDonald's? The school district office or a local bar? A military base or a car plant? The courthouse or a shopping mall? Want to deal with a government cop or a private security guard? There's a pattern here. It's a hugely important one. The relationship between the individual and the state versus the same individual and the market is fundamentally different. And we all know this intuitively. I don't know anyone who relishes in dealing with the government, and yet I know plenty of people who support letting the government take over more aspects of our lives, especially when they don't understand that their favorite program means exactly that. What can make, or how can we make sense of this paradox? Most expansions of government power are pushed without overt public approval, and with plenty of deception, and with the unfair advantage that government itself has in the political process. In other words, it is not necessary that people actively favor government expansion for government to continue its imperial march through society. It only requires a certain level of passive compliance. Compliance is a very dangerous thing. The creation of the Department of Homeland Security and the TSA as its centerpiece is a great example. I was talking with Edward Lopez, economics professor at Western California University, about how this came about. We were both around at the time and we compared notes. How did it happen? Government took advantage of public fear and panic following 9/11 to impose what government had always wanted. There was private lobbying too. Plenty of contractors have gotten rich, so their lobbying has paid off. The airlines might have played a role too in offloading security liabilities. Anyone who knew the nature of government could have predicted the results. There have been exploding costs, and individual rights have been violated. Our privacy and constitutional protections have been shredded. Inefficiencies have ballooned. And for what? No credible terrorist threat have really been stopped. Somehow, at the same time this gigantic government apparatus was created, many people imagined that this time would be different, that the government would magically do better or do a better job at securing us than the private sector could do or would do. Of course, this time is never actually different. The bureaucracy gets created, and then the people shake their fist at it. But by then, it is actually too late. A bureaucracy created tends not to go away. It gets worse, even as it expands and takes on a life of its own. The abuses, the wastes, the inefficiencies mount, and no one can do shit about it. And what I conclude from this is that the average person lives with a complete mental disconnect when it comes to government. We don't like dealing with it. We know the truth in our hearts, and yet we keep suspending our belief that government must be doing something wonderful, some wonderful thing somewhere, even if we don't experience it ourselves. Government promises always falls short. Even worse, government wrecks what it touches. Wars increase violence. Moral crusades produce opposite results. Cultural planning backfires. Welfare programs break and fail to serve. Monetary policy from the Fed yields massive financial distortions. Government efforts to protect industry leads to inefficiency, shutdowns, and stagnation. Government security makes us less secure and subjects us to scary regiments of spooks and thugs. In other areas of life, we are seeing the rise of massive innovation in the private sector that shows the failure of government. The tendency toward loss of political control has inspired new, more extreme, and more obscurist forms of selling state control to us. As the dynamics of public versus private sector continue to shift, we look forward to even more obfuscation about the reality of displacing market forces. And it's because everyone fails to name the state as the main culprit of all of these problems. I pretty much agree with everything written in here. That's why I didn't stop or intervene my own 2 pennies, but you can see it. The war on drugs produced more drugs, right? the war on terror produced more terror. So anytime the government gets involved in anything, it breaks it. It doesn't make it better. And that being said, it is a really scary thing to think that their sole responsibility is supposed to be protecting your rights. They can't even do that right, do they? And yet they put their hands in everything else. Everything. Tell me what you think in the description or comment section. Thanks to my new subs, and if you agree with the video, give me a thumbs up, maybe a share, PayPal link in the description box below. Till next time, kill the state, live free.